Hello everyone and welcome. I'm Naveen Agarwal. This video is a recording of an interactive Q&A session we just had very recently on the topic of risk management for medical devices. Now, risk management continues to be a challenging topic, even for those of us who have been in the industry for many years. So the intent behind these interactive Q&As is to engage in a conversation, in a dialogue. And sure enough, we had a very engaging conversation about certain topics related to risk management. And this is not going to be the only Q&A session. We will have more in the future. So you can watch the entire video at leisure. It's about an hour long. Or you can follow the time-stamped links as part of this video to scroll forward to a question of interest. So I want to invite you to take a look at it. And I hope you will enjoy and learn something new. If there are more questions, please let me know. And I look forward to meeting you again on our future interactive Q&As. Okay, let's get going. I know since Sharon, you are on, you had submitted a question. I will start with that directly. And since you are on, would you mind just speaking up and asking your question?
So my question is around implementing 14971 with contract manufacturer. So 14971 is mainly speaking, per my point of view, about design risks, like how the designer is designing his device, how he is planning to do his risk, and how he is summarizing that, what is acceptable for him, what are the harms, etc. Everybody is familiar with that. However, when speaking about contract manufacturer who is doing part of the system, this is becoming more of a problem because the contract manufacturer is not aware to the harms. He is not aware to all the controls that we put during design into the system. So I'm struggling a bit with this area. So I would hear, what do you suggest?
Got it. I'll share a few starting thoughts, and I know we have two excellent experts on the panel today, so we'll have a very rich discussion on this topic. What I would say, Sharon, is ISO 14971 is comprehensive. It's across the life cycle. So definitely it applies to design, but it also applies to all other stages through which the product goes, even post-market. So it's a closed loop system. What I do with people is that I treat contract manufacturing process as a subunit process of the entire system. You need to know the inputs and the outputs, just like you would in an internal manufacturing environment. So my perspective is that by design, you will have some specifications for your manufacturing operation. Those specifications should support risk controls because risk inputs are coming from your hazard analysis. So once you have those specifications in place, you need to have controls in your manufacturing operation or at a subcontractor operation to deliver those specs. What I help people do is link these different potential issues in manufacturing with your risk process through a bridge document. And that's as much detail as I can offer you right now. But I would open this up for more discussion. I know we have a lot of excellent people on this panel.
Yeah, Naveen, of course, I'm going to jump in. Important part of the design process is design transfer, which is part of design controls. And design transfer is where you successfully transfer the design to manufacturing. And that's where this would be covered. So part of transferring the design to manufacturing includes transferring the design requirements and the specifications. The specifications should include your risk control measures. And your risk control measures should be essential design outputs. And in your contract with your contract manufacturer, you should have identified essential design outputs as something that requires additional effort beyond regular design specifications. And so within your agreement with your contract manufacturer, you should include the risk management activities, and they're going to be responsible to develop the risk control measures that need to be implemented in manufacturing to assure that the manufacturing process does not create any hazards within the product during the manufacturing process. So they have to provide a portion of that risk management. And then, of course, that documentation needs to be part of your risk management file. Anything that they do to eliminate hazards or reduce the ability of hazards to be created by manufacturing.
Yes, absolutely. So again, in terms of practical terms, Sharon, I'm thinking that most people will have an FMEA for the process. So process FMEA. Maybe you will see mostly implemented that in practice. Is that correct?
Yes, sure. Everybody knows about FMEA.
Yeah.
However, FMEA is not exactly matched to 14971.
Yeah.
I will give one example. According to FMEA, they need to take into consideration the most severe risk in each step. In 14971, we know that we need to analyze all the risks. Mm-hmm. So we cannot choose.
Yeah.
This is only one example.
So here's the challenge.
Thinking about that,
go ahead.
The contract manufacturer is not always aware to all the controls that we have in the system, assuming that if I'm the contract manufacturer today, then I don't know each component, what harm or what hazard can this component create. And sometimes the designer is putting controls in his software to protect from things happening in the hardware that I'm not familiar with. But he's familiar, but he doesn't have any intention to give me all the information from the design.
Yep. So here's what I would say, Sharon, is there's an inherent challenge in using FMEAs for the purpose of risk assessment as far as 14971 is concerned. Inherent challenge. And the challenge comes from the fact that FMEAs are line by line failure mode considerations and addressing controls for failure modes, line by line. So one item at a time. Whereas hazards can occur from one or more issues, and they can occur even without any failure, right? So you need to find a way to link this information with your risk documents, which talk in terms of hazardous situations and harms. So it's a translation problem. Problem is, how do we go from hazardous situations and harms to failure modes? We're not going to say don't do failure modes. They are very important. But we need to find a way to bridge the gap through this, what I call translation document. And I've addressed that in the past. This can be done through linkages, but it has to be very carefully addressed. And in your situation, you have to be able to also, I think, disclose appropriately to your subcontractors what they should be aware of in terms of risks so they can control them. Don't disclose proprietary information, but you should be able to disclose to them the potential hazards that you think may occur because of manufacturing. Again, I'll stop here and invite more comments from other folks based on their experience.
Let me point out, Naveen, that the person whose name is on the product, that's a legal person, of course, the company, is responsible for everything in the product. You, as the owner of the application to the regulatory agency, the regulatory approval for the device, are responsible for all of the manufacturing aspects. And as such, it's your responsibility to communicate with those people that have different responsibilities in the process to create your product, and to tell them everything they need to know in order to successfully produce the product. So you have to be responsible to inform the contract manufacturer of all the things they need to do. And in turn, they need to be responsible to provide you all the documentation that shows that they have met those requirements. And you, in the end, are responsible for holding that documentation. Now, it gets complicated when there's some proprietary aspects, and occasionally those have been held by third parties like lawyers and so on to isolate the proprietary aspects. But at the end of the day, you as the person who is putting the product on the market is responsible for everything in the product.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Bijan, Claire, any other thoughts, comments? Saurabh, I see you're also on.
Yeah. One thing that was unclear from the question is that what is the responsibility of this contract manufacturer? Is it simply to fabricate a product, a manufacturing line? Because I've seen cases where companies, especially small startups, they give more responsibilities to the contract manufacturer, even part of the design. So that part was unclear from the question. How much responsibility does this contract manufacturer
Only manufacturing. Only manufacturing.
All right. Well, in that case, as Ed mentioned, the responsibility for compliance to ISO 14971 remains with you, the manufacturer of record. And all the contract manufacturer is responsible is to provide their pFMEA and also implement the risk controls that you give them.
Mm-hmm. Hi, Naveen.
Yes, Saurabh, go ahead.
Hi, yes, sorry I joined late. I agree with that too. With the recent MDSAP requirements as well, the onus is on the manufacturer. So even if you subcontract out to somebody, whatever pFMEA they provide, you have to go through that and make sure that anything that needs to be incorporated to your other FMEAs, your A or D FMEA, are incorporated from any findings from the pFMEA.
So Sharon, I think that's where it becomes challenging, right? Because you have somebody else's pFMEA and you're trying to figure out whether it satisfies your internal requirements or not. And that's what I meant by bridging the gap from a supplier's pFMEA to what you would consider in your hazard analysis and or the risk trace matrices if you want to use them, or some kind of traceability. You need to have traceability to every risk from end to end. And that's where the challenge is, because pFMEA changes all the time. They make changes. How do you know if changes are not introducing new hazards? We have to do that, right? So some of it can be done through supplier agreements. Some of it can be done through your internal processes, which will evaluate those pFMEAs on a routine basis. And your system should be able to integrate them into your risk management process. And the good news is it can be done. You just need to have a more systems view, map it out. I like process maps, map it out, how your risk management process works, what are the inputs and outputs. This pFMEA will be an input to you, and as an output from you to the contractor would be your requirements, including requirements for risk controls, and including, don't forget, change control, requirements for alerting you in case of changes, because you need to evaluate them for impact to risk. So it's a kind of multi-input output situation where I really encourage people to map it out and see what the gaps are and how you will fix those gaps with minimal disruption to your documentation system.
This part requires a greater supplier quality involvement in a contract manufacturer than some of your other suppliers. Yeah. And you may have to go in with a supplier quality engineer to witness some of the activities that they perform to make sure that they are meeting your requirements.
Yep.
And that would be all part of the audit process as well, right? When you bring on a supplier.
Absolutely.
Bring on a supplier and monitor them and requalify them, right? There are requirements in ISO 13485. Mm-hmm. You would probably have requirements to review their risk control systems, hopefully, and a result of those reviews, because that should be criteria by which you requalify them.
And there's also a risk classification that you should be utilizing as part of that supplier quality audit process, that whether you need to add additional controls or audit them frequently or have more scrutiny on what you receive from them. And that all should be outlined in your quality agreement as well.
Yep. Bijan, I noticed you were about to say something.
Yeah, I was curious if the contract manufacturer provides their pFMEA to Sharon's company.
So nowadays, so two years ago, I was on the design side. Nowadays, I'm in Thailand and I'm doing the contract manufacturing. So it seems to me that I'm trying to do my best per my knowledge, where I contribute more than my customer wants to absorb. So,
are they providing you with the pFMEA for the manufacturing process?
I am providing pFMEA to my.
Okay, then are you using your own QMS, quality management system?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, then, so Naveen, as far as the translation, that's not an issue. She's using her own QMS.
Yeah, the translation that I was talking about was going from failure modes and controls to hazards, hazardous situations, and harms.
Oh, well, yeah, that's
the translation.
A universal problem. Everybody has to solve that one.
Yes, and many people forget to do that. Yeah. And I know you have been in the industry for many, many years. We so heavily rely on failure modes that we are not able to appropriately link them to hazards, hazardous situations, and harms. So Sharon, it might, and I understand it might sound very overwhelming because it is. It is a complicated system having many inputs and outputs and many connecting points. So it requires an understanding of the entire QMS, the risk management system, and an understanding of where things can go wrong. And that's why I really encourage a process-based approach to people and take one bite at a time. I mean, my recommendation would be look at your contract manufacturer. What are their outputs? What are their inputs from you?
Okay, because I'm coming from design and now I'm in operations, so I see both sides. So I think it's easier for me to do it.
Yep.
However, you touched some nice points for me to think about. So it's
okay. You're welcome. And again, we can always talk about more specific questions in future presentations.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Saurabh, you had also submitted a question, so I'm going to give the floor to you because your question was I had a slide on it. I'm not going to show it. I'm just going to let you talk and we just have a free discussion.
I'll have to recall what my question was. I was looking for...
Okay, I will tell you what your question was.
Thank you.
So your question was very interesting and very pertinent because you wanted to know how people have actually implemented management responsibility in their risk management process. Does that ring a bell?
Yes. So I was looking more for, at what levels do you integrate management responsibility? The typical is that they approve or review on documents, but beyond that, also looking at potential metrics as well and management review process. Like risk management metrics, I find are very hard to distinguish between the types of post-market feedback and signals that you get. How do you extract out what's a true risk management related signal?
Yeah, I would say there are a couple of different questions there in your question, Saurabh. So let's talk about the management responsibility piece first.
Yeah, sure.
And again, I'll share a few thoughts, open up for discussion, right? Let's understand what the standard requires. Top line, management is responsible to show its commitment for suitability and effectiveness of the risk management process. And how do you do that? Standard tells you allocate adequate resources, right? Ensure you have competence. We are talking about top management, and top management is defined. So you need to be able to define, first of all, what is expected from top management. Secondly, how would you show evidence of those? Two things, adequate resources and competence. Third thing is review at planned intervals for effectiveness and suitability. You have to design your own process, how you will accomplish it. There are some recommendations, and most people do that as part of their management review, and I would love to hear from others as well. That process has to be defined. Whether you do it in a risk management procedure or some other procedure and connect it to your risk management process, it depends on how you want to do it. But be clear about what is required and how would you show that that is being delivered. Those are the two things I would say. So the how piece, in my practical experience, people have really integrated that in, and I have worked with big clients, so that could be different in small situations where people have integrated the whole system into their quality management. Now that's not required. You can integrate with QMS, but it's not required. But I've seen it being integrated in a way that the management review forum itself becomes a place where you would have an element, a discussion point about your risk assessments and suitability, effectiveness of risk. So again, I'll stop. So that part of the question we will discuss in just a little bit, but I'll stop at this point and again invite further thoughts and comments from our experts.
There's one more thing that top management is responsible for, and that is to define and document a process for identification of risk acceptance criteria and determination of risk acceptance criteria.
Thank you. Yep. Absolutely. How would you decide whether risk is acceptable to you or not? So I've seen, and again, many different ways to do that, but it should be spelled out. Some people use like a 5x5 grid and a red, yellow, green color code. Some people might have more quantitative methods, but it should not be left to interpretation or ambiguity. So that, again, remember, risk is severity and probability at the same time. So it's a two-dimensional situation. Thank you, Bijan, for bringing that up. That's very important. It has to be defined upfront and evaluate that if it is appropriate. Let's say you have product X today. Tomorrow you are going into the market with product Y or going to a new geography, location, you discover new hazards, new hazardous situations, harms, and suddenly maybe you have to live with maybe a higher level of risk that was unacceptable. You need risk acceptability could be product specific. And I do have I actually made a video on this. I can send you guys a link. 5 elements of risk acceptability policy based on ISO 24971 guidance. That's a great resource, by the way. So it's a great resource to go, and I've read it like at least 3-4 times, and still I find something new. So Ed, you guys did a fantastic job there. I should tell you that.
Well, I'll tell you what, Naveen, I read it and find something new all the time myself. So
no, there's a lot of good information there.
Yeah, and Annex C in the 24971 talks about the relation between the policy, the criteria for risk acceptability, risk control, and risk evaluation. And there's some great stuff in there. I was not responsible for writing that part of it. I'll make a disclaimer there. The team that did that section, I was involved in the production and post-production aspects. So
now I know where that long list of requirements is coming from.
Well, I'll tell you even more where that's coming from. It came from the GHTF CAPA guidance. Yeah. That's where our 14971 and 1345 created what they call it, monitoring and feedback in 1345 and post-market in 14971. That all comes from the GH CAPA guidance, and there's a lot more stuff in there. I
should really admit, having done post-market surveillance for now close to 10 years, it is a great start there because so much of it was missing. So much of it. Saurabh, any thoughts on that? Any further questions related to management responsibility?
Yeah, so a review of the criteria, like say 5x5 matrix, on an annual basis and having management approve on it, you would agree is kind of like the gold standard or the accepted practice in a way, and assessing your product types of your business on an annual basis. Is that something that is
annual is not the recommended?
Yeah.
The recommended is based upon what feedback you're getting from the market. So in some cases, a device that's been on the market for 20 years that has a ton of information available on it and nothing has changed, you don't need to look at that often. Something that has just come on the market, it's a brand new device that you are just getting feedback on, you may need to monitor that more often. And depending on the information that you get from that new product, it may require you to, from the risk management team, to go to executive management on a more frequent basis than annual. So annual is not the gold standard. It's a FDA answer. It depends.
It depends.
That's the answer.
Yeah, okay. That was my thought too, that it would be dependent upon it. But
I would also add sort of that we also need to look at a higher level. Management responsibilities also for suitability and effectiveness. How do you know your risk management process is effective? Risk acceptability is only one part of that. So you need to be able to think about what criteria you should use to see if it's effective. You know what I'm trying to say? So
yeah,
I think at top management level, I would not say review the risk acceptability policy every time. You need to go to them and say, now it's time because we have met a certain criteria. Now it's time. Here's our recommendation. Please review and sign off on it. But you should ask them how you should determine effectiveness of your whole process. Is it, I don't know, I'm just throwing it out. Recalls, events, adverse events. Because at the end of the day, what are we trying to accomplish? Improve patient safety, right? If I have adverse events through the roof and increasing, no matter how well I do in PMS surveillance, my risk management process somehow is not effective. That's how I would look at it if I were not.
Yeah, your criteria is not stringent enough, that it's not catching.
Or you don't have criteria for measuring effectiveness.
Right.
If you don't, Bijan, please go ahead.
I need to go. I'm sorry. I can only attend the first half of the meeting today. But before I go, one question. Ed, you mentioned you were involved in the authoring of ISO TR 24971. Is that right?
And the standard. I've been on the standards committee since 2000. So I've been through all the editions,
okay.
Except the first one.
Which part of it did you say? You said you were involved in a post-market part of the...
Yeah, when we revised the requirements in 14971 on post-market, and then we had to provide the guidance in 24971, and I was involved in that part of the project.
Great. Thank you. Sorry, I need to leave. Enjoy the rest of the meeting.
Thank you for attending, Bijan. I appreciate your time.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay, so Saurabh, does that make sense? I think what we need to take a step back and ask the question, how would we know if our risk management process is effective at the overall level? That's what we need top management to help us decide. You know, how will they measure effectiveness? And I think a lot of people miss that.
Here's what 24971 says on suitability. Okay, it's under clause 4.2.3. It says there's 3 bullet points. The first is the effectiveness of the implemented risk management procedures. The second is the adequacy of the criteria for risk acceptability, which can imply the need for an adaptation of the criteria for specific medical devices. So you may, as a company, only manufacture class 2 products, and you may create a set of criteria that apply to class 2s, but then you've got this one high-risk class 2 device that doesn't quite fit. So you need to create in the risk management plan a different criteria. So adaptation of the criteria is important. You make it for that specific device. And then finally, the third bullet point is the effectiveness of the feedback loop of production and post-production information. So we're getting this information back. Does our quality management system adequately handle that information and use it appropriately to update the risk management file, to make changes to the product, and so on. So those are the things that are in 24971.
Yeah, the last part is a two-pronged approach where if you don't have a strong post-market process, it becomes difficult for the risk management process to recognize what needs to be updated and actions that need to be taken. So,
yeah, and I think that's where top management's awareness and decision making becomes critical, because if they don't know how to evaluate the effectiveness and clear criteria have not been set, and we have to help them probably build those criteria. But it should be clear, hey, is it working or not? At what point do I have to pull the trigger and say, I need more resources. I need all hands on deck for this particular thing to be fixed. But how you implement, I think your question was also about how people have done it. And my experience was really integrating it as part of their management review process and making sure the procedures were really good, well-written procedures, considering all these aspects.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I know FDA says management review is not an annual activity. It's an activity that depends upon the status of your quality management system, and if it needs to be more than once a year, then you need to make sure that happens. I was in a client that was doing it every 2 weeks because they were in a consent decree situation. They were doing management review every 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's most like firefighting. I've seen once a quarter. I've seen that frequency. Once a quarter doesn't mean that you stop on a monthly basis. There is actually a smaller review on a monthly basis. You aggregate those information at the end of the quarter, or sometimes in the quarter you present an aggregation of those reviews. So again, my experience has mostly been on the large client side. Many other companies may choose to do it differently based on the resources.
They also may concentrate on a small portion of the management review every quarter, so that it takes the whole year to get through the entire quality system. But you take what's important and you do that every quarter, and then you've got things that are less important, then you only do them once a year, and based upon the quarterly management review.
Yep. Any other comments from other folks? What has been your experience in terms of integrating risk management with risk management, top management oversight? What challenges have you faced?
I could share a couple that I've had just to see if that aligns or jives with people. But in one company where I worked, we had a risk management board process where every project we had to bring the product review of all the top risks and the overall residual risk profile, and present it in front of top management, as well as a medical affairs or medical consultant, and get that approved. So they would have to all agree and accept the product. And if even one person disagreed, you would have to bring it back, or go back and abandon or redesign. But that process, which is like similar to what the risk management review process requires, but that would be one way of doing it. And then the other is through the risk management report process, that you have top management review and approve that document. So they're basically putting their stake in those elements of the risk management process.
Absolutely. Good point. Anybody else wants to share anything? Okay. So, Saurabh, you also briefly touched upon post-market signals, correct? You wanted to talk about that a little bit. Do you want to go over your question?
I think the main points I have are does anybody have any good advice for risk management metrics, and how would you derive those? So when you do these management reviews, besides reviewing just post-market, how do you know that it attributes to something that was missed in the risk management process along the way?
Good question. I would say in my experience is that I think we are moving towards that direction slowly in the industry. And I'll invite Ed and other folks to share. Risk management is still an evolving discipline and function in our industry. We have done it in kind of piecemeal way. Design has taken care of it some way, process has taken care of it another way. But as an integrated process or a holistic process, I think it's evolving. That's number one. Second thing is that a lot of the metrics that people use in management reviews are still, in my mind, very compliance-driven metrics. In my personal opinion, that doesn't necessarily tell us effectiveness, because compliance is only a snapshot in time. I think the short answer to your question, Saurabh, is it is still an evolving field. I have many ideas, but I have not seen that really implemented yet. At the end of the day, we want, like I was saying, at the end of the day, we want to be able to make sure we are improving on patient safety, we are improving on adverse events, we are improving on our response to adverse events, we are improving internally to catch the problems before they happen. So this could be, again, we also don't want to have a long list of metrics too, right? We are used to looking at dashboards, which are messy. So short answer to your question really, Saurabh, is that there's no one specific or a set of specific metrics that at least I can tell you would be useful for you. I would say if you are having to think about it in your organization, it is best to go and ask your key stakeholders, what is their perception of how risk management should work and what will make it effective, or how will they detect if it is not working well? You need to do some kind of a stakeholder analysis and interviews within your own work if you are responsible for doing that, especially the executive team, okay? And that will probably allow you to develop metrics that would work for you specifically.
Okay.
I know I'm not giving you a very straight answer, I know.
No, I think that was
to mislead you.
No, I think that was actually very helpful. The interview process of stakeholders. I think that might be.
I think you need
a good way to start.
And how will they know if it's not working? That's the best way. And let them speak to you. Hey, oh, maybe I'm going to look at non-conformances. Oh, maybe I'm going to look at my recalls or adverse events. Right. Make a list of it, and then do cross-functional. Don't just stick with one. Go to even your business leaders, not just quality and compliance or regulatory. Go to your market, go to your manufacturing, go to your regulatory, go to your supplier quality, everybody. You go there and say, how would you know if the process you are responsible for is not working from a patient safety point of view? That's a question to ask.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges I've seen throughout my career is trying to understand or drill down to these post-market issues, like if there's non-conformance or if there's complaints in the field, like what are they attributed to? Mm-hmm. The one area that I look to is saying that, okay, maybe a failure mode or a hazard situation was not identified in the risk management file. So that could be one metric to see how many times did this happen that it wasn't identified in the risk management file. Right. And if you have a high enough number there that indicates that you're not doing a good job identifying risks, that could be one way of doing it. The other is maybe, okay, you had risk controls and were they not effective? So just looking at elements of your hazard analysis or pFMEA to tell what is working, what's not working. But those are kind of convoluted because it's not just an element of the documenting it in the file, but it's also the whole design control process that goes along with it. So to drill down to the root cause, you might have identified it, but then the rest of your process didn't follow through, or maybe you didn't identify enough sample sizes, or a whole range of things.
I would say, Saurabh, I think you were on the right track thinking about this. But let's also recognize that as people like us who have a lot of subject matter expertise, sometimes we focus a lot on detail. I think it's best to take a step back and just ask a simple question to your very key stakeholders in the organization. The process you are responsible for, how would you know it is not performing to deliver patient safety? Open question. How? Open question, make a list of whatever they say, go to another stakeholder, ask the same question, make a list of what they say. You will see patterns because they don't look at your files. They look at business in a different way. And it'll help you understand how they perceive patient safety, first of all, right? So I think it's more of in my mind, not a detail-driven question, because if we give them a piece of paper with 5 metrics, they'll go, fine, go do this, right? I don't know. I think we should do probably both. We should do back and forth. Hey, this could be a recommendation, but don't start there until you have this feedback from these stakeholders, all of them, not just one. Go all. how would they know? How would they know if there's a patient safety issue based on the process they are responsible for? That would be a way to look at it.
Another thing you can look at is the number of design changes that occurred based upon risk management findings, I guess, after the product has been released. That's a metric you could also look at, but it's something that is evolving, and we have been working real hard on the design side for years, and we got the design side down pretty well. We've been working in manufacturing a little bit, and we've got a lot of that done. But now we're looking at, after we've completed all this risk management stuff, what's the impact? And that includes the post-market end, which we just strengthened a whole lot. And you're going to be looking at things there from the post-market end. And what I would suggest is that any new product that is going out that gets a huge amount of scrutiny, company I worked for was very successful. When they released a new product, they assigned and this was a serviceable product, it was a capital product. So they assigned a service person to each facility that released got the new product, and they had to get in contact with them every week and find out what the performance issues were, what kind of problems they were having, and so on, and report back to the product team. And so every week we were getting reports on what was occurring in the field in the last week for that product. So it was pretty timely. And we had a good idea for a new product. And you could use that kind of information from a new product to tell you how the present version of the risk management process is performing.
Mm-hmm. But it becomes part of your design process, right, Ed? You were saying don't sit back and move on to the next one. After you launch it, treat it like a newborn baby with care and see what attention it might need, right? That's the way I would do it.
The other thing that we did was the new product team had to stick with the product until the metrics got to some predetermined level, that you couldn't move the engineering team to something else until the product was performing the way it was expected to perform.
So they're on the hook. You just cannot do something. This is great discussion, guys. Any other comments, questions? How do you guys feel about the forum? Any suggestions, recommendations to improve?
This is the first time I've actually joined in. And it's very interesting, and I must admit a lot of it's gone over my head because I actually work in regulatory affairs, and I'm very interested in the risk management process, and obviously in regulatory affairs we have to work alongside colleagues and help with risk assessments and things like that. So really I've just been sitting and listening, but it's been very informative.
I appreciate it, Claire, and I think what might be really helpful if you could think of risk from a regulatory point of view and propose a question that we could discuss. And what I encourage people to do when they sign up for registration, just submit a question. And as you saw today, and like last time, we start with a submitted question, and that drives the conversation a lot.
Yeah.
So if you submit that question at registration, I would have some time to think about it and maybe facilitate the conversation around that, and you could have a much more deeper perspective on the question specific to you.
Okay. So I have got a question, and I'll submit it next time then.
We have time if you want to bring this up.
Are you sure? Because it's probably a really stupid question.
There's nothing like
no
that.
such thing.
Here in this forum, there's nothing. No such thing.
You've not heard it yet, but so I recently read a use FMEA for a wound dressing. And one of the hazards was that the patient ate the dressing. So I understand that that could happen, but I don't understand how it could be a reasonably foreseeable misuse. And it's difficult to explain, because for me, if it's misuse, it's maybe put on the wrong wound, or it's left on a wound for too long, but I don't see how somebody eating a dressing is a misuse. Does that make sense?
I got it. So first of all, I should tell you that people do a lot of things that are not really anticipated.
Yeah.
Definition of reasonably foreseeable misuse is normal human behavior.
Okay.
Okay. There are two parts to reasonably foreseeable misuse. One is use error. Use error is our understand. Now, what is normal in location A may not be normal in location B. So be sensitive to that. You may be a global product company and your product may be going to different locations. You have to think about what's considered normal behavior and practice in those countries.
Okay.
That will be use error. Now, there's also a component of reasonably foreseeable misuse, which is abnormal use. What you are describing is potentially abnormal use.
Okay.
Whether intentional or intentional does not matter. But in your experience, if you have heard an incident, now it maybe a child bit on it. It was laying there. Maybe they didn't do it purposely, but the child is curious. The package is there and they bit it. So what I'm trying to say is that you have to put your customer, a user hat on and send people to the field. Send them to observe people. Have people do diary, like when they launch a product, they might ask patients and users to maintain a diary. You might observe their actions. So the more you kind of open your mind to what may be anticipated versus what is abnormal, you may classify it separately. Because there are some things you will be expected to control if they are genuine mistakes.
Yeah.
If it is abnormal use, you have to anticipate and figure out, it can happen, yes, but what am I going to do about it?
Yeah.
It's a question to ask, right? So I hope it's not black and white and it's not crystal clear, but understand what is reasonably foreseeable misuse has two parts and both are included.
Right. Okay.
So it's not just my common sense may not be really common. When you do this analysis, what you know, common behavior in your workplace or where you live may not be the same as where your product is going.
Yeah, and the other aspect is the definition of risk is severity and probability. And if you've had one in the 2 billion wound dressings that have been distributed, that's a pretty low risk item. And you may not have to do anything about it. But if it has happened in the past, as Naveen pointed out, it is something you need to explore to find out what the risk really is of that kind of thing. And he pointed out the definition, and you can look in the standard definition of reasonably foreseeable misuse is use of a system in a way not intended by the manufacturer, but which can result from readily predictable human behavior. And that includes behavior of all types of users, the lay user and the professional user too. So the child is a user that needs to be explored, and that's most often where that kind of thing could occur. Or perhaps in a area where there's dementia or other types of mental conditions that could be affected there. So you've got to explore all of those avenues, but again, go back and look at the probability of occurrence of those things and see what kind of risk controls may or may not be required.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So to my knowledge, this has never happened with our products anyway.
rely on.
Has it happened with somebody else's product, which is similar to yours?
I think that's what's happened. That maybe it's been noticed that it's happened, or maybe it's just like you say, a child or somebody with dementia. That's something that they could do. So it's being included. I'm not too sure on why it's gone in, but I'd need to look into that. But
look at the risk level that's applied to that, and I would expect it to be relatively low.
Right.
And that would tell you that the risk may be acceptable for that kind of situation.
Okay, thank you.
Can we speak, because we speak about use, can we rely on usability studies and consider that this is not normal use?
Yeah, I mean, sure. But I think what I try to tell people is that design your usability study to be able to answer key questions. Because the questions you can answer depends upon the design of that study. And if you have not thought up front, you may have a list of 100 questions, but based on what Ed said, hey, we have heard about it, probability is very low. We're not going to focus on this part of usability, but we're going to observe. Part of usability study, you may observe things that you did not intend to or did not plan to. They should all come back in. So I think what's most important here is analysis, means identification, and think broadly. Doesn't mean that you have to control every single thing, but you need to be able to show to people that you did a lot better than anybody else in your industry. You thought about this. Because if you look at adverse events rates or data, may not be relevant to your product, like Claire, you were saying, but if it has been reported with a similar product, you need to look at that situation. It's possible it may happen to your product as well. It's just that it has not happened so far. So I would say be comprehensive in the design phase, narrow it down, but document it, because you will show we did so much work, but here's why we decided to narrow it down in our usability study, if that makes sense. But I would not feel comfortable just saying that I leave it to chance that I will find it in a usability study. If that's important, you need to go after it with a purpose and intent.
But
Can I clarify for you?
Go ahead.
On the post-market end, you may want to add a trigger in your post-market monitoring to look for that kind of incident, so you can get a better handle on the probability.
A great point, actually. Maybe you think ahead in design phase, 10 different scenarios. Usability, you decide to study 5 because on certain criteria and considerations and constraints. The remaining 5 you can put on the list to monitor over time through post-market. And you can say, now I'm going to, the point that Ed made that, hey, design is done, product is launched, don't move on to the next one. It's still a newborn baby. You have to care for it and understand its needs. And you will learn in the next, 5, 6 months, 1 year, whatever you decide. I used to call these safety surveillance plans for new products. When I designed a PMS system, I established what I call safety surveillance plans. And those safety surveillance plans were based on the risk of the product and the time frame that product has been in the marketplace, how mature it is. My requirements in SSPs, safety surveillance plans, were more stringent for newly launched, highly technical, risky products versus product that has been in the field for 10 years. So you could take that approach and say, we're going to do a lot of work up front, but most of it we're going to, just put aside to monitor in our post-market phase through safety surveillance plans. Nothing wrong with that. Good question though, Claire. Thank you. And again, you may have more. So please feel free to kind of put that on the board when you register. We have a field in the registration form that you can use. But I think we are kind of running out of time now, and this is great, and time always flies. So again, I really appreciate all of you attending.